Hi, welcome to session 8. I am excited. We are moving forward here, and today we're going to return again to the relief of suffering brain chemistry class. But first we're going to do our centering, and then once we do our centering, we'll go to the class, and then I will follow that up with a take-home tool. So I hope you enjoy the process this week. Let's go ahead and begin our centering. So today as we center, I'd just like to take a deep breath. And bring myself to this moment. And for today's centering, I am just going to connect with my body quickly. I'm going to become aware of my toes, balls of my feet, my heels and arches, top of my feet, my ankles. I feel my calves and my shins, my knees, connected to my hamstrings, my thighs, my glutes. And I connect to all of those internal organs, those systems that keep my body healthy and functioning. And if I've ever lost anything, if I've lost a limb or an internal organ, any part of my physical being, I take this moment and I connect to the feeling of having it there. I connect with what every sensation of my body feels like. Not because they should be there or that I'm incomplete without them, but because it becomes an opportunity to heighten my awareness. Continue through my body, moving through the vertebrae, one at a time, through the rib cage, connecting with my heart and lungs. Bring out onto my limbs, my arms, my elbows, upper arm, forearm, wrist, hands, all of my fingers, my thumb, both thumbs. Connect with my shoulders and continue up my neck, throughout my skull, to my face, my cheeks, my chin, my jaw, tongue, my lips, my nose, my eyes, my eyeballs. And in this moment, I just connect with feeling complete health, feeling anything that's out of balance or unhealthy coming into balance. And from here, I connect to my centering. And for today's centering, I'm going to begin by asking the right questions. The right questions are always questions which seek possibility and solution. They are always toward the positive. and where we want to go. They are not about where or who we've been, but instead they are about who we want to be. So for today's possibility process is about transforming the question of what can go wrong to what can go right. With everything happening in your life, with the practices you're doing, or even the challenges you're facing, what can go right in your life? If at first you want to say nothing, sit with the question for a moment. What is possible? Use your journal to answer the question over the next couple days and ask it more than once. In the beginning of any contemplation, our mind will replay what we've known in the past. So to find new possibility, we must open ourselves to what we do not yet know. So allow your mind to really consider what might go right. What good thing could happen? Be willing to consider the answer and whether or not you accept it. If you don't, ask it again. Ask it as many times as you need until you get an answer that truly inspires you. When you do, keep it close and read it often. So if you're using just the centering practice for your practice today, you can go ahead and pause the video here. I will be using these screens for our centering practices. There will be a different one every time, and you can always find where you left off by going back to the screen where you see me again. When you come back, we'll be connecting with a piece of the class that is about what causes addiction, and then that will be followed by a take-home tool. I wish you a peaceful and centered journey during your possibility process, and when you're ready to continue the video, we will begin with that class. So as we continue, what we're going to do is again connect with this class that I taught called The Relief of Suffering, Introduction to Brain Chemistry. And in this class, I talk about what causes addictive patterns. Now, we're often told that addiction is a broken brain, but that is not accurate. When we're developing these dopaminergic pathways, we're doing it as a survival mechanism. So I'm going to talk about how that survival mechanism works. And then over the next few sessions, as we are completing phase 1, I'm going to share with you the different states of the brain in detail through that class. And we're going to be able to start observing ourselves and how to modify the triggers, because if we can eliminate these triggers, we can eliminate addiction. So again, we're going to cut over into that class, and then after the class, I will be back with a take-home tool. I hope you enjoy. So what I want to talk about is understanding dependency and the addictive cycle, what's really happening in the addictive cycle. And I'm going to explain, having been a severe addict, was a severe addict for the majority of my early life. And so I've been on both sides of the coin. So what's happening is the addictive cycle is you're having a sensory trigger occur, right? So some sight, sound, taste, touch, smell is combined with some memory, yours or some ancestral memory, and you've entered a high state of suffering, right? So here I am, my life is stressed, or my life is sad, I'm depressed, I'm angry, whatever. I'm in my state of suffering. what happens is the brain wants to relieve that suffering, right? Because first of all, it's killing us. Second of all, the suffering is causing damage to our body. That stress state is causing damage. So what's been classified as reward systems, and now this can work in primates. Primates can be trained in reward systems, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. But what it is self-medication. Most advanced medical communities now call addiction self-medication, right? It is not a malfunction of the brain. The brain is dying and it wants to not be dying. So addiction is not about pleasure. It's about, I'm suffering so much. I just need relief for a minute. I just need something to make me feel a little better. And not dying feels better than dying. So we go to that. And at some point, everything we're addicted to, everything we have dependency on, made us feel better at some point. And so it's what our brain returns to. Again, you're not having new thought when you're in high suffering states. So you're not having new ideas. So for somebody to walk up to somebody that's in negative thinking patterns and go, think positively, it's biologically impossible, right? To think positively when you're triggered in a negative state. The first thing we have to do is relieve the suffering. So what happens is we relieve the suffering, that happens, it becomes a new sensory trigger. So then it becomes, oh, this thing makes me safe. Then we get triggered again, high state of suffering, relieve the suffering.
Still addiction, right?
This is just the addictive cycle. Sensory trigger, high state of suffering, relief of suffering. And the thing is on the sensory trigger, what we're trying to control is an impossible thing to control. We need to control the right thing. And the problem is most approaches don't approach the right thing. They're trying to control something that's an after effect. We can't remove states of suffering by approaching the suffering itself, because it's a byproduct of the trigger. We have to approach the trigger. The problem is the trigger is unpredictable, right? If it's somebody grabbing my arm that's causing me to have a trigger every time somebody touches my arm, well, we've had a million scenarios in our life that are all sorts of random triggers that we don't think about, sending a child to their room without dinner, or telling them, or kids in school excluding a child. All these things become triggers in our mind that we are not consciously aware of. It's all happening on an unconscious level. So to try and control the after effect of it doesn't work that well. It can work, but it's nominal. It's arduous and incremental is what I call it. So again, what happens when we're relieving suffering when we enter this state of rest and digest. Our systems are on, but not peak. And we live in dependency or addiction in a reward-based model, but it's not really reward. Pretty miserable. It's pretty miserable being an addict, because even those drugs don't feel good. They don't feel good. They just feel better than life felt before. That was the moment I quit using hard drugs. I'm still an alcoholic after that, but I quit hard drugs I was coming down off of a drug, and I just suddenly, I was like grinding my teeth, and I was driving my fingernails into my hand, and I was shaking, and I had a migraine, because every time I did the strike, I get a migraine. And I just sat there, and suddenly I went, how bad was my life that this felt better? Right? It's just, life is so miserable and so impossible, and there's nothing else in that moment that seems like it can help. And so at some point, the drug made us feel better. So there are certain drugs that stimulate dopamine, right? And stimulate those feelings that cause dopamine release in the system. But the goal of addiction is not about the dopamine release. It is about feeling good, but because of the state of suffering. I've worked with a lot of people that have addiction, and they just quit organically. I mean, I've talked about one person that came in that drank every night, came in and said, I realized I've been doing the practices and I haven't had a drink in 2.5 weeks. I didn't even realize it. Because you don't crave the drink if you're not triggered, right? So that's what's making it, by the fact that we're not in that feeling. So you can look at things like amphetamines that do make us feel good, and so you crave that good feeling, but good feeling is our natural homeostatic state.
So the real motivation is the fact that we are suffering and we want to end the suffering, right? Which is a result of brain function. So yeah, so there's different drugs are going to do different things, but ultimately all addiction, because drug addiction is no different than porn addiction or shopping addiction or TV addiction. And none of those are causing the kind of chemical outcome that is really driven by. So for example, if I'm addicted to TV and watch too much TV, I'm not getting dopamine. I'm getting serotonin. I feel safe being distracted in somebody else's story right now, right? It's a distraction so I can trigger safety and well-being. But there's no dopamine there. There's no. Then might get to the point where I laugh at something, but I'm not really driving dopamine. Not the kind of dopamine that's going to trigger the insula. I never feel motivated after watching TV. Just, so.
Usually people just want to keep watching.
Right. Because it's the drug, right? It's the same as if I get fired from my job and I trigger fight or flight. I might, if I have a food addiction, I might stop and want to get chocolate cake on the way home. I'm going to feel good while I'm eating the chocolate cake until the cake's gone, right? It's my belief in the cake that makes me feel better. It's the taste, the flavor, the sensory trigger of it. But again, I'm dependent now on the cake to feel good.
Okay, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that video, and I hope it gave you some clarity as I discovered this. For me, I was able to finally release a lot of shame and guilt and feelings of being inherently broken. I was taught that having an addictive brain was a broken brain, which is not accurate. It's actually a survival mechanism. It's just that we're in such a high state of suffering that survival mechanism is kicking in a lot. As we relieve the states of suffering, the survival mechanism can then calm down and we will have fewer addictive cravings. So what I want to do this week is, as your take-home tool, is I want you to challenge the brain a little bit. And I want you to take note of how you feel before and after. So today's take-home tool is challenging the brain. And so what we're going to do this is we're going to have an observational process. Doing these observational processes will increase as we go. This is going to be a major focus over the next few sessions throughout the end of phase 1. But what we're going to do is we're going to be able to heighten and recognize different practices and how much they affect our brain. Because if we can find the practices that have significant impact on our brain, and we can do those every day for 20 minutes, that's where we're going to see quick, lasting impact. And so this week's take-home tool is going to look like this. You're going to observe how you feel. You're just going to take a moment and say, how do I feel right now? And then I'm going to have you do a quick 10-minute practice. You're going to set a timer on your phone and do something for 10 minutes. It's going to seem like a long time. If 10 minutes is too long for you to begin with, what I'd like you to do is 5 minutes, but try to do at least 5 minutes. So you're going to do somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes of the practices I'm about to give you. And then you're going to write again how you feel after. So you're going to have a chance to do this throughout the week. You can do it repeatedly. You can keep a book with you. This is a great one because you can do it anywhere. You can do it in the line at the store if you're starting to feel triggered and stressed. You can do it in traffic. If you're in a stressful driving situation, you can do it. So this is a nice one because this is one you can take with you anywhere you go. And so again, what you'll do is you'll start by pausing for a moment. And I'd like you to do this right now and say, how do I feel right now? Now, if you've just done the centering practice, you might feel calm and relaxed, or you might still feel some anxiety, some stress. Even if you feel anger or guilt, any feeling you have, just take note of it. And I recommend writing it down. Just find a single word or a sentence or a statement saying how you feel. Or if you want, you can write more detail. If you're feeling really stressed about something, you can write out how you feel. If you need a moment, go ahead and pause the video for a moment to write what you need to write. As you feel ready, then what I want you to do is just put down the writing instrument, however you're writing. And I'd like you to do one of the following. So there are a couple of options in this practice. One of the first is reciting the alphabet backwards. So you may not be good at it at first, but what you want to do is try to be as accurate as possible. And you would use whatever methods or techniques you need, except for visually looking at the alphabet. You want to just do this in your head, where you're trying to go backwards. Z, Y, X, W, V, U, T. Work backwards and just do what you need to. If you need to go forward in your mind for a minute and then backward, whatever you need to do mentally to try to do the alphabet backward. So what we're doing in this practice is when you're accessing something from early development and then making it more complicated, it forces us to move more into the thinking mind. So one of the biggest things is when we're triggered is we're on autopilot. We're running off programming we already have. When we introduce something new for the brain to do, it has to shut down that autopilot for a minute and pay attention. So what we're doing is we're starting to stimulate the prefrontal cortex, and this decreases the use of the amygdala, and actually over time can shrink it. Now these practices generally only work for so long. Eventually you'll memorize the alphabet backward and you'll be able to do it easily. And at that point, you're going to need a different practice. But in the beginning, if it's challenging, this is a really great thing to trigger that rest and digest function in the brain. The second exercise we're going to do is counting. Again, this is something that begins in early development, so it's something that's in our mind. When we're in a triggered state, we're generally in our earliest development. So our brain learned most of its survival mechanisms before the age of 9. So these early things like learning the alphabet or learning to count were part of that really early development. So they're still accessible when we're triggered. Oftentimes more advanced thinking. If you're ever wondering why, oh, I get this now, but why can't I understand that function or that thing when I'm stressed? Why am I worse on tests? Why do my skills decrease? Well, it's because we're triggered in that old state and all that new knowledge isn't accessible. So what we want to do is go back to what's accessible, but again, complicate it. So in this counting exercise, what we're doing is we're going to take a task that is easy and becomes progressively more difficult. This is a great thing for if you're really triggered, because sometimes doing the alphabet backwards when you're really triggered can be more stressful. But these counting exercises tend to gradually move us out of highly triggered state. So there are a few I recommend. You can count to 10 as many times as you can, as fast as you can. This isn't a slow count to 10. This is I'm going to count to 10 over and over again as fast as I can. This can be a challenging thing to do for a full 10 minutes. So remember, you can use it in conjunction with other things. You could count to 10 as many times as you can, as fast as you can, and then switch to doing the alphabet backwards. Or you can switch to another counting exercise, such as counting sums. This was one of my favorites because it begins really easy and it gets increasingly difficult, and it does so rapidly. So what you're doing when you're counting sums is 1 plus 1 is 2. Then you take 2, 2 plus 2 is 4, and then you take the 4, 4 plus 4 is 8, and then you take the 8, 8 plus 8 is 16, 16 and 16 is 32, 32 and 32 is 64. So you continue this way. And fairly quickly you do get into the thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. And then it gets difficult to keep track of the numbers as you're adding. And that's the point you want to get to, where it's difficult to keep track, because that's the part that's triggering the function in the brain that you want to trigger. You can also count by random numbers. You can count by 8s or 12s, practice your multiplication tables. Begin with what is easiest and allow it to gradually increase in difficulty as you go. If you are already good at multiplication tables, that may not be the place you want to go. Maybe you want to count sums instead. But do something that's challenging. There are a lot of different counting processes that you can do that you can find on the internet if you want to find new and interesting ways to count in a challenging way. The last thing I want to talk about is reading. Now, reading is one that can be really challenging, but what we want to do is we're using this as a soothing practice. So we're going to do light reading. We're not going to challenge ourselves as much with reading as we did with the alphabet and the numbers. What we're going to do instead is use reading as a soothing practice. So we're going to return to things that are familiar and comforting. So this is reading inspirational text. It can be reading spiritual philosophy if you have a certain belief system. It can be returning to books that bring comfort. It might just be recreational reading. We don't want to get into complex reading here, educational, philosophical, reading that really challenges our brain. We don't want to do that kind of reading at this point. What we want to do is we want to just do reading that is soothing. But while you're reading, what I want you to do is read one word at a time and completely absorb it. Slow down and just read. Don't read quickly or skim or try to get too far. Focus instead on slowing down and really being with what the book is saying. So those will be the practices. And then when you're done, again, you'll do one of these, write how you feel after, and then make a comparison. How did you feel before? And this is why it's important to write it down, because you may not have full recollection. So you can take what you wrote and then you can compare it. You can write again, how do I feel? Don't think about the first one. So as you write the second one, don't think about the first one, just stop. You finish the practice and say, okay, how do I feel right now? And you might notice right away, wow, I feel my chest doesn't feel as tight, or I'm not as angry as I was before, or I don't feel as guilty or confused, or whatever feeling you might be having. So you can notice that, and then once you've written down how you feel, you can then do the comparison. If the comparison may start to happen organically, but try to focus on how do I feel right now before you worry about how it compares to how you felt before. So that'll be our take-home tool for this week. That is session 8. I hope that you enjoy the process of observing how these practices affect you, and I will look forward to seeing you for session 9. I hope everyone has an amazing week.